keeping the non-kinetic means in mind and even the psychological factors in mind. So it's affecting and doing the irreversible toward Pakistan. I wonder if tomorrow, in the years ahead, if Pakistan declared and have a drafted doctrine, it will be actually an opportunity for India to play below that threshold. Now coming to the second point, since Pakistan, like we have a small sea, what about the biads? Can we have a second biad in the second specialty? Thank you.
Okay, last question for this panel, Dr. Islam.
Thank you very much. It is understandable that when we say first use, that then you can't go for massive retaliation. That is very theoretically understandable. So at this point, but my point is that there are two interlinked things in Pakistan's official statements or whatever we are reading in the literature. First use and last resort. What is the linkages, how you elaborate the last resort? And second, especially keeping in mind that as Seamus I pointed out that the formation is coming and you are responding to that. And the second important thing is that when we talk about the Nasr as a battlefield weapon or whatever give it a name, are we prepared for delegation of the power to use them? Let's say if we can go for a sea-based deterrence, and Pakistan lacks the geographically some kind of things, and sea can be a big strategic depth for Pakistan. Are we prepared for delegate the power?
All right, let's reverse this order now. Anton, would you like to go first?
So I'll take the question about the ground control, which the lady at the end asked. I think there have been very, very few official Indian statements about the sea-based deterrence. The fact that the Ariane has reportedly been commissioned without there being an official statement to that effect, I think is very telling. We have a very clear statement that India has a no first use posture, so that is a factor. When it comes to command and control, as you say, I think I agree with your assumption that there is a strong political control element and culture in India for this. Let's just see what technological and other solutions they are able to develop to solve that particular question. There have been reports of clear infrastructure investment in DLF facilities. Now that is part of the answer, it's not the entire answer. But from where I stand, I do not have the full answer, plus things are still developing.
I think the first question was directed to me, and I'm not quite clear what it was that was being said. I mean, do I understand that the kind of thesis that was being put forward is that Pakistan is being threatened by India? Actually, the words I think were by Prime Minister Modi, but in the context of surgical strikes and maybe other things, and that if those were to take place, and if as a result Pakistan was to respond with a nuclear weapon, the blame would not be on Pakistan, but would be on India. And is that what the proposition was? But if that is the case, let me assume that is.
Mr. Shah, this was your question. I'm not listening.
Okay, well, I'm going to proceed on the basis that that was okay. And the answer to that is, I disagree with that absolutely and completely. I think that any use of nuclear weapons in any context will be severely censured, quite apart from any retaliation or escalation that would follow. So I have absolutely no doubt that the first time a nuclear weapon is used since 1945 will be a horrendous moment for the world, and that the country that decides that it has to do that there will be enormous consequences. And of course, some of the analysis that policymakers and ultimately politicians who will be deciders, I guess, will have to make will be the context in which there was sufficient threat to the vital interests of the country that caused that country to respond by using nuclear weapons. So I think there's, there are serious political judgments that have been made, but I don't think that any not quite casual use of a tactical weapon would be forgiven lightly. Indeed, I think the sanctions that would follow would be very severe.
Dr. Madari has to give after this. Can we indulge you with the responses that you have expected of you? Thank you.
On doctrines, yes, doctrines are very important because they, one for yourself, because doctrines help to clarify what sort of programs and weapons mix you will have, especially, as I said, because there is no empirical data other than the Americans using the bomb. We need to rely on doctrines and therefore evolve a certain rationality about those doctrines. Obviously, in a crisis situation, Pakistan's response would be seeing what sort of attack India has undertaken, the assumption being, and quite rightly so, that India would be the first to indulge in military adventurism. And if the world feels that it's taboo to use even tactical nuclear weapons, then perhaps an equal amount of pressure should be brought on India not to be adventuristic in conventional weapon terms. So if Theresa May, instead of giving India a pat on the back and signing nuclear deals, should also have sent a message to India that its military adventurism that it's indulging in at the moment could lead two nuclear weapon states into a state of war, and then things could spiral out of hand. So doctrines, yes, they do matter, even though in real life situations, if a war breaks out, responses will be in keeping with what the other side is doing. But doctrines help you set up your strategic weapon systems, your policies, and so on. And if I heard Mr. Leves, clearly you again said India has a no first use doctrine, but clearly if you look at India's own government statements, it does not have a no first use doctrine after 2003, when it categorically stated that it has the right to use nuclear weapons against a WMD attack from anywhere, which means chemical and biological weapons, which means it's advocating a first use. So the West can have blinders on and refuse to accept that India has a first use doctrine even after Parikar's statement in November. But doctrines there are important because India has now declared time and again that it has a first use doctrine, whereas Pakistan has kept its doctrine ambivalent, so we are not committed to first use. And that's why we keep saying as a weapon of last resort. So in that sense, I think doctrines do matter. On whether India will shift, I think India's nuances in its doctrine have been shifting. But India's second strike capability and its nuclear submarines is not something new. Remember, many decades earlier, they had established the Far East Command in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So India's outreach, nuclear outreach by sea was then and was there much earlier on, and is contained within its overall aggressive nuclear doctrine that it has. So it really doesn't need to shift. But the nuances, with Parikar now coming out and stating publicly that no, we don't have a first use doctrine, but they're becoming more emboldened, but essentially their original doctrine, when it was altered to first use in 2003, after that they really don't need to change it, but they can change the nuances and priorities within that doctrine.
It's very interesting about the strong political control in India in terms of nuclear weapons use. In one of the track 2 meetings, very interestingly, this issue was raised that Indian government is very reluctant to hand over control of the nuclear weapons to the military. What will happen once you deploy the weapons on the naval platforms? How will you maintain political control? And one of the retired Indian admirals in the meeting very innocently said that we'll put a political person on the submarine. So you can imagine the fate of that poor guy who was loaded on a nuclear submarine during wartime. So these are the kind of justifications they come about. So this lot of it is just rhetoric and practically it does not have any value. In terms of Shakir's question about declared nuclear doctrines, that he thinks that India will exploit if we declare it, just read India's draft nuclear doctrine, 6 pages, and 1 page which they announced on 4th of January 2003. Does it give out anything which can be exploited? And why can't we issue a 1-page document like that? What are we going to give out which is going to be exploited? These kind of declaratory doctrines do not give the targeting policies, they do not give the thresholds. So they are not subject to exploitation, but by unnecessarily insisting that since we have not announced it so far, we are never going to announce it, we are not gaining any advantage, we are just giving an opportunity for Pakistan's critics to score points that we do not have a declaratory doctrine. About Jaspal's question of how do you reconcile first use and last resort, this has been right from the beginning, the Pakistani thinking that we will use the nuclear weapons as a last resort. And in fact, it has been explained in different ways. One explanation was that if we feel that we are run out of all conventional options and Pakistan's very survival is at stake, then we will consider using nuclear weapons. Which was basically to indicate that although we will be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict situation in South Asia, it will not be an early use. Obviously, India, with its great conventional advantage, will not be the first one to be forced to use nuclear weapons. So it will be Pakistan which will be first to contemplate use of nuclear weapons, but it will be in a situation where Pakistan feels that it's really in a corner and there is no other way out. Regarding the delegation of command for Nasser, that has been a big issue and one of the reasons for which people have been criticizing that what will happen to command and control with such a short-range weapon which will be deployed right at the edge of the battlefield. But what we have heard from very senior officials and responsible people in the National Command Authority, they insist that they have tested, tried, and they have means and systems in place which will enable a centralized control of these weapons. These will not be deployed prematurely, they will only be moved and deployed once they are required to be used, and for that purpose its security and its command and control will be maintained centrally by the National Command Authority.
All right. I could respond to a couple of comments, but I will save that for my closing remarks and use the chair's prerogative to allow a very, very short question by Rizwana Masi and thereafter, you have the last.
Again, I would come back to what Dr. Jaspal commented. I think theoretically it cannot be incorrect adopting massive retaliation and first use at a time. Both are compatible because when we saw Eisenhower adopted throughout the Cold War system, America adopted first use policy, and then of course Eisenhower went for massive retaliation. But of course, in parallel to that, we understand that there are a lot of pressures coming out of academic and of course strategic community. They realize that they have to minimize collateral damage. At the same time, they have to focus on minimization of on minimum civilian deaths. So resultantly, they offered, they thought a preferable policy choice option for them was flexible response and later on limited nuclear options instead of massive retaliation. Though in the context of Pakistan, yes, I agree with the speakers and thank you very much for clarifying your perspective.
I was not politician, these are SPDs.
All right. Thank you for this short intervention, Rizwana. You and Dr. Jaspal would need a discussion on the side. Gentlemen, the last question.
Well, I have a very short question. I'm really intrigued as to how the British, the Americans, and the French manage their command and control over the, as far as delegation of authority is concerned, in terms of giving an okay for a nuclear thing on a submarine. Because the question that was raised just now, that you know, how do you delegate authority for use of a nuclear weapon on a submarine? How do you communicate, and who has the control, you know, on sea-based or air-based systems? You know, something which Salek, I think, said about India. So I want to ask a similar question about Britain, France, and America, and Russia.